It is the distinction between what we call assessments of learning, which have as their purpose to check student achievement status at a particular point in time for purposes of public reporting, as distinguished from something we call assessments for learning, which have a completely different purpose. Their purpose isn't merely to check to see how much students know and what they can do, but rather the purpose of the assessment process and its results are to help students learn more, to increase their achievement. Both assessment of learning and assessment for learning are important. They're both critical, but they're different and they're not interchangeable, and that's the distinction that I want to draw for you. What I'm going to argue is that if we balance our investment in and attention to both assessments for learning and assessments of learning, if we get them in balance, everybody wins and nobody loses. Students win, teachers win, parents win, communities win, administrators and school leaders win, and policymakers win. Everybody wins, nobody loses. And they all win for the same reasons. They win because assessments are more accurate, student desire to learn remains very high. As a result, their achievement goes up, and everybody's accountable for student learning. There are no compelling arguments against doing what I'm about to talk with you about, balancing the two. But the price we must pay in order to achieve victory at all those levels is we must invest in the infrastructure of American education by getting into teachers' hands the tools they need to assess productively for learning. We have to balance our assessments of learning and our assessments for learning. For that reason, I want to draw that distinction more clearly for you and examine the differences between the two. We've already established a primary difference in purpose. Assessments of learning are intended to check student achievement status at a particular point in time for purposes of public reporting. Assessments for learning have a completely different purpose. Their purpose is to help students learn more. As a result, the information that they produce is intended to go to different places. In the context of assessments of learning, we intend to tell others about student achievement or others about students. In the context of assessment for learning, we intend to tell students about themselves. Those are fundamentally different directions for the information that results. And as a result of those differences, the assessments focus on different things. This is maybe one of the two or three most important differences of the several that we're going to talk about. The focus of standardized assessments of learning is achievement standards. They may be state standards, they may be district standards, but the exercises and scoring procedures on assessments of learning are going to lead to conclusions about whether or not students have met standards. See, here's the critical point. That's not the purpose of assessments for learning. The purpose of assessments for learning is to provide teachers and students with evidence of student mastery of the achievement targets that underpin success in the state standard. That form the scaffolding that kids climb on to get up to be ready to meet the state standard. They're the building blocks. I don't know how many different metaphors for this I can think of, but they're all the foundations. In fact, this distinction is so critical that I'd like to illustrate it with an example. Let's say that just hypothetically we had a state standard that said we want high school students to be able to use social studies research methods to compare and contrast different interpretations of historical events. This is a common standard across the country. See, if we develop a state assessment, it's going to include exercises and scoring procedures that ask students to demonstrate that they can do that. But see, my point is that's not the intended or should not be the intended focus of classroom assessments for learning. Rather, what we should be doing in classroom assessments for learning is that we should be taking that standard, and teachers in the classroom on a day-to-day basis should be taking that standard and asking 4 questions about it. And those 4 questions relate directly to the foundations that set kids up for success. For example, they should ask, what do my students need to know and understand in order to be ready to meet that standard? That's the foundation. What specific patterns of reasoning must my students be masters of in order to be ready to demonstrate that they've met that standard when the time comes to do that? What performance skills, if any, represent foundations of success ultimately in meeting that standard? Or what product development capabilities? See, my point is that what we ought to be centering instruction on and therefore classroom assessments on an ongoing basis in the context of assessment for learning is student mastery of those foundations that lead them up to a place where they're ready to demonstrate that they've met the state standard, and that's a fundamental difference between the two. See, the point is that assessments for learning happen during the learning process. Assessments of learning are events that occur after learning is supposed to have occurred. So that, for example, examples of assessments of learning include our state assessments or college admissions tests or those kinds of things. And here I want to make a little bit of an extension in this thought. I want you to understand that assessments of learning aren't merely imposed upon the classroom from outside. Teachers conduct classroom assessments of learning also when they conduct assessments, the scores on which will go into the grade book for the determination of a report card grade. That's an assessment of learning. It's a periodic check of student achievement status at a point in time for purposes of public reporting. Now, on the other hand, examples of assessments for learning are those assessments that teachers use early in the learning process to diagnose student needs, to determine how to plan instruction to meet those needs, and to help kids understand those needs. Assessments for learning are those assessments that we conduct along the way to help students watch themselves getting better. See, during this improvement process, or as we diagnose their needs, those assessments have no place in the grade book. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to help teachers and students watch things get better over time. And then at the end of that process, we'll check achievement status with an assessment of learning, and that's what the report card grade would be determined by. So they're fundamentally different. So my point is that the users and uses of the two are fundamentally different. The people who use assessments of learning are program managers and school leaders and the media and parents and teachers, and these do inform instructional decisions. So in that sense, they enhance learning also. I don't mean that they don't have an impact on learning, they do. But I want to draw a distinction between that and assessments for learning, which are used only by students and teachers during the learning process. So that, for example, we use assessments of learning to verify competence, to determine report card grades, and for certain gatekeeper functions like college admissions or high school graduation. The uses of assessment for learning are those of helping students to understand what success looks like, and to help them and teachers understand what to do next to improve over time. The teacher's role is fundamentally different in the two. The teacher's role in the context of assessments of learning is to be the test administrator. You remember all the rules for when we were in school where we had to maintain test security and run the time clock and everything? That's the test administrator, making sure that everybody has the same opportunity to respond to the test questions. But the teacher's role in assessment for learning is a fundamentally different role. It's that of the partner to the student or the coach who needs to figure out what the keys are to student success, those underpinning achievement targets, and show those to students so that they can understand the keys to their own success. Those are fundamentally different roles. The student's role is different. The student's role, again, you'll remember this from your school years, in assessments of learning, is to get the highest score, avoid failure. That's not the student's role or purpose in the context of assessment for learning. In this case, the student's role is to strive to understand what success looks like, what it will look like to be good at something, and then use the assessment process to learn how to do better the next time. The roles and users and uses are fundamentally different. And all of this leads up to what I think is the single most profound difference between the two, and that is the manner in which they address the issue of student motivation, the manner in which we use them to help students want to learn. On the side of assessment of learning, it has been our long-standing tradition to use the scores on those assessments as the basis from which to dole the rewards and punishments that represent the foundation of a behavior management-driven motivation system. On the other side, assessments for learning, the manner in which we cause kids to want to learn, is by promising them a high level of success if they keep trying. Success becomes its own reward or motivator.